Let's talk about what I read in the month of January. So in January, I wanted to read a lot of popular novels that I kind of missed last year because I tend to not go for really hyped books that often. Like, I might read 1 or 2 a month, but for the most part, my TBR consists of like a lot of backlisted stuff. So for January, I was like, let's play catch up on some of the most popular books on here on booktube. First, I want to talk about some of the things I didn't finish. I picked up Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston, and I think I got about 35% of the way in. I'm really enjoying it. I just, for some reason, haven't been in the mood to read physical books. I've been reading a lot of ebooks, and this is one of the physical books I own, so I haven't finished it. It's nice for the month of February for Valentine's Day, so maybe I'll finish it this month. Another thing I didn't finish was Punk 57 by Penelope Douglas. I'm 70% of the way through this, so I don't have a lot left. I know I'll finish it. It's not a permanent DNF or anything. Personally, I don't like this book, but I'll save my total review for some other time once I'm actually done the book. The next book I didn't finish was Priest by Sierra Simone. I'm enjoying it, but not as much as I thought I would be. I think I'm about halfway through it. Hopefully I'll finish it this month as well. I read 6 issues of the comic book series Fence, and I just don't get the hype. I didn't feel like there was a whole lot going on. I felt some of it was pretty cheesy. It didn't work for me, and I won't be continuing on with that series. Now let's get into the things I did finish this month. The first thing I finished this month, or this year I guess, was Tears of Tess by Pepper Winters. This is a smut book. It is a kidnapper type of book. The main character, Tess, goes on a vacation with her boyfriend to Mexico, and she gets kidnapped and sold into sex slavery, and eventually this guy buys her, sort of. He actually gets to send her for free as a favor, and they kind of have a relationship from there, sort of. I've always heard that this is a classic of the dubious consent genre, and I was looking for some good books in that category. I just didn't love this though. I don't know, I think I've read too many books that are similar to this for me to really love this. The main character just is so flighty from one minute to the next, and obviously I get that she's in a terrible situation, but it makes her character really annoying when she just changes her mind every 5 seconds. And then the love interest, he's just like every other love interest you've ever seen in these types of books. He's broody and intelligent, but super rich, and like has some dark backstory, so that's why he's like the shitty person he is. I just don't care about those types of characters anymore. I've seen it and I'm over it. I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. It was fine. I just wasn't excited by it. The next thing I read was A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. I had never read this book before. I never read it when I was a kid. I know it's a classic. It was on my list of 30 books to read before I'm 30, and so I picked it up this month, and it was fine. It was short, and I kind of enjoyed the feeling I got from it, like the feeling of reading middle grade. I just don't do it a lot, so I don't have that feeling a lot, I guess. But there was just something about it that was so like heartwarming and nice and like whimsical. But the actual story itself, I didn't really care for. At times I found it needlessly confusing, and then there were times where it would just go so fast, and like it just felt like there was stuff that could have been happening in between getting from point A to point B. It was just, I don't know. I also watched the movie and didn't love that either, so apparently Wrinkle in Time is not for me. But I did give it 3 out of 5 stars. I think I could understand why kids would like it. I just didn't. The next thing I read was 6 of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. I'm sure most people know what this is. I apparently didn't until not that long ago because I knew it was a fantasy, and so right away I was just like, not gonna watch it, or not gonna read it, it's not gonna be for me. I don't do fantasy. Then I found out that there was a heist involved, and suddenly I was in. I love heist movies, so I've never read a heist book before, so I really wanted to give it a shot, and I loved this. There was just something about the book that I was just so engrossed in it. Like, I wanted to be reading this at all times. I ended up, I mean, it's not the smallest book ever, and I ended up reading most of it overnight. Like, I just stayed up until like 6 a.m. to finish it because I was just like, no, this needs to happen. I will say that the pacing was a little bit off in some places, and But that might have had to do with the fact that I was reading the ebook and I had like 50 pages to go, and it was like, no, this is the last page, because for some reason there's like 50 pages of other excerpts from other books, and I was just like, oh, okay, weird. I will say, like, I don't have a strong connection to the couples. Like, I know a lot of people are like, oh my god, Inej and Kaz, they're my OTP, but like for me, I just didn't really feel that connection between them. I actually liked Nina and, oh crap, I can't remember his name. Her boyfriend. Her dude from her past. I liked their dynamic the best because I felt like it was the most complex and, I don't know, the most fleshed out by far. And I feel like the more time I spent with Nina, the more I enjoyed the book, because I really loved getting like that backstory. So that was really great. Kaz is obviously fantastic. Jesper is probably my favorite character. Yeah, I just can't wait to read the sequel. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed it so much. The world was great. The next book I read was Pretty Girls by Karin. I thought I would love this more than I did. It was very fast paced and it kept your interest, which I liked. I liked that you could understand the main character's point of view. I did not explain what this was about. It's hard to explain what this book is about without giving away spoilers, but it's a book that has to do with girls disappearing and never being seen from again. The main character's sister is one of these girls who disappeared and no one ever heard from her again, and they don't know what happened to her. And the book kind of takes off from there. Here's the thing, everyone talks about how incredibly dark and gruesome this book is, and I mean it is, but it's not any more dark or gruesome, to me at least, than a Criminal Minds episode is. And like, so in my opinion, if you can handle Criminal Minds, you can handle this. And that was the thing I felt like with this book, is I didn't think it was any better than an average Criminal Minds episode. The only thing that made it impactful, in my opinion, was the point of view of the main character and like the stuff she's going through. So that made it really interesting, and her thought process I really enjoyed. But the rest of the book, I was just kind of like, it was okay. I will still read more from Karin though, so I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next thing I read was Credence by Penelope Douglas. Now this book is about a girl whose parents commit suicide, and she goes to live in this secluded cabin with her step uncle and her cousins. They're not related in any way, thank God. It's a reverse harem book, so she kind of ends up with having feelings for all 3 of them at one point or another. I decided to start reading this the day it came out because, like, I don't know, I just like got caught up in the hype, and it was fine. I have realized Penelope Douglas isn't really for me, and I know that's like not okay to say. It's almost like blasphemous in the smut community because everyone loves her. Everyone seems to set her as like the bar for good smut writing. But I'm just not really into it. Like I've read 5 or 6 books now from her. I read 2 books in the Bully series. I read 2 books in the Devil's Night series, Punk 57, and this one. So I've read 6 books by her, and none of them have done it for me. Like, they've all just been fine. This is probably my favorite one, actually, of all the ones I've read. I just come away from her books not caring about any of the characters every single time. I definitely liked Jake's character the most, the uncle character, but as soon as she started to hook up with him, I was like, nope, 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 please stop, because even though I wanted her to be with him, as soon as it actually started happening, I was like, this is gross. The dad, like, daughter type of chemistry they had ended up just, I didn't like it. And then I just didn't really care about the one character, and then like the character she ends up with came out of frickin' nowhere. Like, it didn't make any sense. It was not fleshed out in the least. I was fine with them being together. I just wish that there had been more foundation to lay that upon. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I really like the atmosphere. That was probably the thing I found the most, is that I want to read more books like that take place in the wild, or like, not the wild, but like the forest, and I don't know, that have that sort of atmosphere. And I will say that at least this is a very original smutty book, because I've read so many erotica that just all copy each other and all sound like the same book. So props to Penelope Douglas for coming up with something original. The next book I read in the month of January was No Exit by Taylor Adams. This was so good. This is a thriller about a girl who's making the trek back home from college or university or whatever, and she ends up getting stuck at a gas station because there's a snowstorm, and she's stuck there with a couple other people. And once there, she realizes that there is a child locked in the back of one of these people's vans. This was so good. When I first started, I was like, okay, this is just kind of fine. But it just picked up so much, and I ended up loving it. The author does such a good job of showing you who these characters are. Like, I think it's really hard in a fast-paced thriller like this to really define the characters and give them personality. But I loved the main character. Like, I was rooting for her so hard, and she was so ingenious in the things that she was doing to get herself out of the situation and to save the girl. And like, her and the child's relationship, loved it. So cute. And then there was the villain. The villain like made this book to me, because I will always say this, if a villain is enjoying the bad shit they're doing, I always love them a million times more. Like, because the villain in this wasn't just being physically hurtful or whatever to try and get away with what they were getting away with. No, the villain enjoyed the mind fuckery that they were able to do. Like, that's where they really like got a hold of things and like really delved in and enjoyed things. And like, I don't know how to explain it. I love that. I feel like this would make a great movie. I would go and see the shit out of that. It was just so good. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I think everyone should be reading this, and I feel like everyone is. I just didn't. The next thing I read was We Were Liars by E. Lockhart. This is about a group of cousins who all come together at their like family cottage every summer. One of the aunts begins dating this other guy, and they bring along his nephew. Lo and behold, this nephew and the main character end up falling in love, and the book kind of takes place like during all these summers, and something's happened and the main character can't remember things and whatever. I thought this book was really interesting at first, and I was actually pretty impressed because I feel like I haven't heard the best things about this book. I feel like for a teen novel, this book was doing a good job of kind of exploring class divides and racial divides, and it was doing it kind of in a shallow way, but in a way that's perfectly accessible for the target audience for this book, which is people in high school. And I thought it did a pretty decent job at that, and I was really enjoying it, but then it just decided to blow it all up with this really, you know, twist ending, and I was not impressed. The ending was fine and shocking, but I just feel like it completely undid anything the book was trying to say. Like, because it felt like, okay, this book has a message, and then it just kind of buried all that when they came up with this giant twist. So I wasn't super impressed with that. I ended up giving this book 3 out of 5 stars. The next thing I read was Know My Name by Chanel Miller. I listened to this on audiobook through Scribd, and holy shit, this book was so powerful. She's such a great writer, and just incredible for being able to go to such a honest, authentic, raw place over something that is obviously traumatic. Chanel Miller is a woman who was raped by Brock Turner at Harvard during a party. The trial obviously was covered all over the place in the news, and this just explored everything that she had to go through from that night onward. And she really goes in depth for like her feelings about having to see this night play out on the news over and over and over again, and having to have her identity kind of like stripped away from her. And this book is kind of about reclaiming that. It was really, really good. I think it's one of those books that I want to say every man should read, but no, like, it's a book that everybody should read. Especially for anyone who's ever said, I don't know why women don't come forward, because this goes into great detail as to why women don't come forward. It really shows all the traumatic bullshit that she had to deal with, not just that night, but for years afterwards. It also goes into like the everyday sexism and harassment that she faced, not even as a rape survivor, but as just a woman in the world who exists. And I thought there were just so many important conversations that she had in this that, I mean, you just want to scream and cry, and it was so good. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It is a very important listen. The next 2 things I read were The Raven King and The King's Men by Nora Sakavik. This is book number 2 and 3 in the All for the Game series. I became completely addicted to this series. This is about a kid on the run who ends up playing Xe, which is this NCAA sport. Obviously it's fictitious, but in this game, or in this book, it's a huge game. So he ends up signing up with this team to play this sport while still trying to hide from his father and all the other mafia men who are after him. I just fell in love with this series. I honestly don't even know if I have a ton to say about this. I loved all the characters. I loved the found family element. I loved the really weird relationship that blossomed between the main character and one of his teammates. There's obviously a lot of talk of trauma and just traumatic things that happen to all these boys. A lot of it is very ridiculous, but I loved every second of it. I just can't believe how much I like this series. I will definitely be buying this so I can reread it. It definitely isn't the best written book ever. I didn't love the second book as much as I liked the first and third. I don't care though. It was all great. I gave the series as a whole 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, time for a book that I hated that everyone else loved. I listened to Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid this month, and I don't get it. This is a book about a fictitious band in the, I don't know, 70s or 80s that were famous and then had a big splitting up after one huge album. This takes place in interview format and it has a full cast on the audiobook. That's the one thing I will say, the audiobook is obviously very well produced and very well narrated, so that was great. But I just don't understand why people love this so much. It's so shallow. Like, it doesn't have anything to say really, and I just feel like, I mean, yeah, it has some quotes that are nice, but I mean, that's it. I don't know, I was just expecting so much because so many people love this, but to me, it felt so cliche. And like, if you were to tell anybody that you know to write a book about a band in the 70s that got really big, it would be this story. Like, it would go exactly this way. And actually, I kept listening to the book. The thing is, I started this book a while ago and I only got 20% into it. So when I decided to go back to it, I decided to just restart the whole thing over again. And as I was listening to it, I kept thinking, oh, I've already listened to this part. Oh, I've already listened to this part. And then I kept getting further and further in the book and still thinking, oh, I've already heard this. And then I realized, like, no, I hadn't heard any of this. I was at like 60% and I was like, there's no way I've heard this. But I just think I do because it's so predictable. This is exactly the way I expected the story to go. Honestly, I would have DNF'd it if it wasn't for the fact that everybody was like, oh my god, that ending, I'll never stop crying. And it was like, when the ending came, I was just like, oh, that was it. Okay. I just don't get it. To me, the ending was just kind of like a manipulative thing tacked on at the end to make people emotional. Personally, it didn't do anything for me, but I get why it would for some people. I wasn't a fan and I gave it 2 stars. And the last thing I finished in the month of January was The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. I kind of went back and forth between reading this on ebook and listening to an audiobook, and I gotta say, I love the audiobook. The narrator does a great job. I think this is a great one if you need something to listen to. If you hadn't heard, I feel like most people have, but if you haven't heard, this is a book about the main character, Star, who is with a best friend from childhood, Khalil, when he gets shot and killed by a police officer. And it's about everything after that she has to go through while trying to get justice for him, as well as just living her day-to-day life. I really enjoyed this book. I expected to, honestly, like the way people talked about it, I kind of figured I would like it, and I really did. One of the things I love the most that I wasn't expecting is it keeps like a sense of humor, and like her character is just really likable to me. I've heard some people say they didn't like her as a character because they felt like she was a blank slate, and I was like, but that's how teenagers are. They aren't fully themselves yet. And I loved her inner struggle between what side of her she could show. I thought thought that was really interesting. I loved the family dynamic. It was just so authentic and real and happy, and it was so nice to see a family dynamic where the parents are like really good parents. I also really loved her relationship with her boyfriend because once again, it's just nice to see a teenage relationship portrayed as something that isn't toxic or isn't drama filled. And I loved like the fights they did have because they were honest and real and fights you would have. I think a lot of the conversation was obviously necessary. I think it was really well done. And I think that this is a great book for teenagers to have because like I kept thinking to myself while reading this, like I wish I had had this book when I was a teenager. I grew up in a very small, very white community and I didn't know a lot about race, and like I still don't, I'm still learning. And I feel like this book would have been so nice to have back then. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. It was really, really good. And I'm sure everyone has already read it besides me. So the actual last thing that I read in January that I forgot about was manga You're My Pet, which I read on Comixology. This is about a woman who, I believe her and her fiance break up, and she finds a homeless boy outside of her apartment and she decides to bring him in and keep him as her pet. I read the first volume of this and it was just really cute, kind of silly, but the relationship was adorable, and that's really all I have to say about it. I think if you want a really easy, cutesy manga, this is a good one to read, and I'll definitely continue on. I also read some issues of Fables, but I'm always reading Fables, so those are the books I read in January. Hopefully I will get just as much read this month.